All right. Well, hello, everyone. I want to start with a thank you. We really appreciate you guys joining us today. But before we jump into that, just a quick intro. My name is Richard Marcus. I head up information security at AuditBoard, where I oversee product security, enterprise security, and all of the internal audit, compliance, and risk activities that we perform for ourselves internally at AuditBoard. But really, the funnest part of my job is that I get to work with CISOs and CAEs and compliance professionals across our customer base, hundreds and thousands of these professionals day to day. And I get to talk to them about the challenges that they face in their teams, the programs that they're building, and really help collaborate in problem solving for a lot of those challenges. So, more than anything, I'm really excited to share with you all today some of those insights that we've been picked up throughout those conversations. And I'm also really excited to be joined by a very special guest speaker co-presenter here, Omer Singer from Snowflake.
Thanks, Richard. And hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. My name is Omer Singer. I joined Snowflake about 4 years ago and initially led security engineering, where my team played a role in everything you're going to hear about, kind of enabling a data-driven compliance program. And the last 2 years at Snowflake, I've been leading the company's cybersecurity strategy, helping customers to succeed with a security data lake.
So we know the future is going to have data. We know it's going to have technology. Let's talk practical now. What does this unlock, right? What do these capabilities allow us to do as compliance professionals? And where do we see some of the benefits happening? I'll tell you that for me, one of the sort of dependencies, right? This is really the foundation or the scaffolding of a really automated and data-driven compliance program is using technology to start to conceptualize or bring together your controls inventory. So the important thing here is that you have one place where you can manage all of your requirements and trace the relationships and justification for those requirements. So, one of the things I think is a huge pain point for a lot of people is you might have different sets of regulatory frameworks that you're bound by, and being able to deduplicate and align those with your control library so that you're only implementing things once, your audit once, comply many sort of concept is able to be applied. And then when your control owners start to work with you, they understand, why it is you might be asking for certain things. They understand the scope of those requirements, right? What assets are sort of in scope of that requirement. And then ultimately who's accountable, right? So this is the source of truth for your asset owners, whether they be system or application owners or control owners or risk owners, right? One single common source of truth where everything is laid out and organized and makes everything that you build on top of this more efficient, over time. I'd like to say that, if you automate a bad process, you're going to end up with more bad output, right? So this is one of these kind of fundamental foundational building blocks before you start to automate, before you start to optimize, something that's really important to get right when you're kind of starting on this journey. I think once you have this sort of basics kind of scoped out here in your controls inventory, the next thing that we tend to think about is evidence collection or control testing. And so again, this is one of these kind of fundamental building blocks where before you start automating things, like, do you understand kind of what you want to do with these controls? Do you have procedures outlined with, what kind of evidence you're hoping to get to satisfy these control requirements? So I really strongly recommend that, you might be out there manually testing controls for one cycle or two cycles, and you really get those procedures down correctly, kind of who to go to get that information, what systems maybe it's coming from, and then, I think if you have really good compliance people on your teams, they're going to start to get bored doing the same thing over and over again, right? One or two times they go and collect this evidence, they go, hey, this is not stimulating. We got to figure a way to automate ourselves out of this job. But I think having the clarity, the continuity of the requirements and the process down, making sure it's repeatable and consistent, those are all kind of key things to make sure you have in place before you can start to think about continuous monitoring or automating this process. But again, it all comes back to having that sort of run book or procedure defined in your control library.
I think it's also just worth pointing out in terms of kind of having the kind of controls identified and scoped out. Super important. What I see some teams when they say, okay, well, we want to get data driven and we want to start analyzing, et cetera. They focus on the sources. They take kind of, I would sometimes call it like a hoarder's mentality. Where like, I want it all, bring me all the data. You know what I mean? And when they bring in 5 data sources and the next thing they do is they bring in 5 more. And I think starting with this approach and understanding, well, what is it that we really care about? And even just having in plain English the kind of things that we want to ensure are the case. Then from there, it's a question of, well, what data will I bring in and how will I automate this, et cetera. But that's great guidance for anybody starting out on this journey. Like, start with this, start with scope, start with like, what are the controls that I really care about? And ideally, you're starting with them not in a spreadsheet where it's kind of a dead end, right? I think anytime you're using a spreadsheet for something like this, like, you know you're doing something wrong. Like, especially now, like you look at what's on the screen here, this is exciting because this is a solution that's available off the shelf that both includes all these controls mapped to frameworks, et cetera. But what we're going to see soon is that it's not where this ends, right? It's only the beginning.
Right. That's right. I think, once you have some of these fundamental things in place, I think in the legacy process, you'd start thinking about, hey, I want to go conduct a gap assessment, or I want to go start collecting evidence. In the old model, that might have been, hey, I got to schedule a meeting with someone, or I need to send them an email, or request a document or a report. And I think depending on where you are in the maturity curve, that may be, it might be okay that you're starting out there, but ultimately, if you go through that process enough times, you start to encounter the challenges and some of the friction there, you'll come to realize that technology-enabled evidence collection is really the way to go. What we're showing here is sort of like maturity level 1, which is having some workflow to schedule and notify control owners or asset owners when some updated evidence is required, and being able to kind of put that on a schedule, send it out, let them know exactly what evidence it is that you're looking for, demonstrate traceability back to the requirements. They understand why it is they're being asked and what the scope of the ask is. And then you can start to build that evidence repository over time. But this is really only scratching the surface of what a technology-enabled workflow will allow you to do. This is still kind of semi-manual. It's a little bit smoother, a little bit easier. But again, sort of the next step on that continuous monitoring journey would be leveraging some technology to make that control owner experience a lot more smooth and manageable. I think where this starts to get really exciting is when we start to take this to the next level, which is continuous monitoring.
First, I don't want to assume that everybody is familiar with Snowflake. Snowflake is the data cloud company. The idea is that we've built a data platform that is cloud native. Think about it like a big database in the sky. It supports all 3 of the major clouds. And when you load data in there, it's very cheap to store it. There's no limits on how much data you can collect a day, how long you can keep it. And companies are using it for lots of different use cases, lots of different departments. It also supports an open architecture, so you can plug in applications to it. And that's where this gets interesting, because what we're seeing is companies like AuditBoard are saying, wait, if there's already a lot of relevant business data in Snowflake and it's easy for people to bring in different evidence, maybe we can kind of provide a fast track to effective continuous compliance automation by running on top of that Snowflake. So when you see this reference architecture, the Snowflake you see here is your Snowflake. If you're like many companies out there, there is an instance of Snowflake that folks are using in different parts of the enterprise. And so the idea here, that existing data platform can be used now to support continuous compliance automation, with AuditBoard working as the compliance automation layer on top. Whether it's collecting data or whether it's applying the controls, not as English, but as SQL, to the data that's been kind of loaded and normalized within Snowflake, where, again, you can have unlimited amounts of data. We see companies loading in terabytes and terabytes of data. We call this the security data lake model. We see security data lakes in the many petabytes. And our job is to just make it cost-effective and fast to ask questions of the data, and then AuditBoard focuses on the compliance use cases. So you have a really good kind of division of responsibility here, and the idea is when you're using AuditBoard in this kind of configuration, it's not yet another silo, right? That's what we want to really enable. Let's get a single source of truth going, have that single source of truth be serving the security organization for all sorts of use cases. Threat detection and response, we're seeing a bunch of that happening. Could be vulnerability management, could be, in this case, compliance automation, and taking advantage of that data and the platform. And then also the fact that insights are recorded back into the data platform. Well, now you as the compliance team are able to reflect findings and gaps and whatever you want to communicate to different stakeholders using the standard enterprise BI solution. Because probably it's hard to get everybody to log into, whatever tool you use that's specific to a use case. But your CFO, your CIO, all the different stakeholders are going to have access to a BI solution like Tableau, Looker, Power BI. Now, the hope and what we're seeing is that the compliance findings and the situation and the security posture and all that are being reflected in that way. So very exciting, and I think is really the way to achieve the kind of partnership that extends across kind of the people, the processes, and the technology that we talked about.
Definitely. It probably goes without saying, but Snowflake and AuditBoard are customers of each other. So we're going to show some examples of some continuous monitoring use cases that we've developed for ourselves, right? So a lot of the stuff that you'll see now is stuff that our teams have been working on for our own internal compliance activities. And we think they should sort of illuminate or maybe help you guys conceptualize how this type of technology and architecture might be useful within your own teams. So the first example that I'm going to share has to do with evidence collection that we're pulling in from our AWS environment. So what you're seeing here is a mapping of all of the CIS benchmarks for AWS hardening. And this is, whether you're a NIST shop or maybe you follow PCI or ISO or SOC 2, doesn't matter. These are technical controls that can really be mapped or aligned with any of the compliance frameworks that you might be following. We've imported them into our control library and mapped them to the various controls and frameworks that we follow. So that's step one. Step two would be connecting a monitor back to that AWS data. So whether you're asking AWS directly or you've got this data that you're pulling in from AWS into a data warehouse like Snowflake, that next step is setting up a monitor. So in this case, what we're monitoring for is a specific requirement around password policies that say passwords have to expire and be reset within 90 days. So we're just asking a question of the data. Do I have any users in the users database there that has a password that's older than 90 days? Pretty simple question, answers in the data. So creating a monitor here to go out and fetch that data automatically. And then I think where this becomes really powerful, as you can see down there at the bottom, there's a timestamp, right? This is something that can be scheduled, and you can ask this question much more frequently if the bots are doing it than if you were having a human, trying to answer this question with any degree of efficiency.
And to go back to the opportunity of the security data lake and having all this data centralized, is that a lot of times the information you need to really automate is not present in the record itself that you collected off that API. A lot of times they'll have just kind of one dimension of the data. But for example, in this case, so you have an IAM password policy for a certain user. Is this user on the cloud engineering team or are they on the sales engineering team, right? Have they recently been fired or changed teams, right? These are all considerations that could be very relevant. If you didn't have the data centralized, what you might have had to do is to take the initial finding and then have somebody review it before passing it along to the people that actually fix the issue, which kind of breaks then the whole continuous compliance stuff, right? Because if you have to have a human in the loop for all this, then the automation really kind of breaks down and you're back out of the continuous. So with this model of AuditBoard pointing to Snowflake, where Snowflake is very flexible in what types of data it can take in. Anytime you find that you need to have a human in the loop, you say, well, why did this human need to be in the loop? Oh, because they need to check that info, and that info is not available to the continuous compliance system yet. Well, then the next step is let's talk to our data engineering friends and bring in that additional data set so that we can move that task out of the kind of analysts day-to-day and into the automation. And that is very powerful, right? That gives me a lot of hope that we're going to be able to do much better and, in the future as an industry and hopefully never fail an audit again, right? Because if you're continuously asking the questions that the auditors are going to ask, you're going to be successful. And I remember we had a situation once where we were doing for something, some agent coverage on some server. And I asked the compliance manager that was doing why aren't we checking for that once a day, once an hour, right? We have the data. We have the asset inventory in our Snowflake. We have the logs from all the security agents in our Snowflake. So why not have a simple SQL statement that says, hey, if you see a system that is in inventory, but you haven't seen them in the logs, there's an agent missing. let's fix that before the auditors, log into a sampling of servers like they do. They'll pick at random and do the sample. Check across all of them automatically and avoid getting dinged in the next audit.
Right. Yeah. What I really like about this approach as well is that if you're collecting data for to answer a particular question like we just showed, you can start to build a repository of that evidence over time. And if you have your controls mapped on the back end, now that evidence becomes useful by lots of people in your organization that might be trying to answer similar questions. So maybe you collect it for a PCI audit, but it's also useful for the SOX team or internal audit or some other function, maybe some other team doing some other type of audit. You can pull in and start to organize and create that audit trail that becomes really useful for other teams. So let's take a look at a couple of other examples. This is another great one. Everybody's got to do vendor reviews. Most organizations have a requirement to do a risk assessment on new third parties that they engage with. And then there's where people usually fall down is on the annual reassessment or whatever period you have to go and reassess those relationships over time. So this is a great monitor that someone built on our team to kind of look at all of the different vendor information that we have in our database, look at when was the last time that was reviewed and notify us when it's time to review that vendor again. So as Omer mentioned, here's the sequel for those that are interested, right? We've got the data at various tables. We know where that information is. We know what risk tier a vendor might be in, and we know the dates that they were last reviewed. So you end up, with a query like this that says, tell me where you've got vendors that are maybe outside of that threshold or maybe approaching that threshold, so that this becomes actionable information that the compliance team can use.
Sorry, just before you move off of this slide, I know sometimes SQL on the screen, it's a little bit scary. Like, I assure you, again, this is stuff that you can get comfortable with, or you can find partners. This doesn't have to fall on the compliance team. This is where the partnership comes in. The data teams at your kind of organization, the enterprise, are very used to and comfortable partnering on turning requirements into code. And speaking of this specific use case around kind of vendor risk management, what we've been doing as Snowflake is going out and talking to the providers of vendor information and saying, hey, can you make your data available on the data marketplace? Because how much easier is it when you can get the information about the vendors through a data share, no API integration required, right? One click within the marketplace, requested. And we're seeing the vendors responding. So like Panarrays is on the data marketplace and security scorecard. So I think the different providers of details on vendors are making the move. And to the audience, ask the vendors that you work with to start playing a role in this ecosystem, because they won't have a lot of work, just a little work to make your lives much easier. And we're seeing vendors happy to do it. And, feel free to send them our way. I'm happy to work with them to turn their investment in your use case into something that can help them broadly, right, across Snowflake's other customers. And so it won't be wasted effort. And that's definitely the role that we're looking to play in the ecosystem.
It's a great and exciting point. I think for those that are intimidated by the SQL, I was going to show a more, human readable.
Okay, good. Here it is.
Right? So like you guys are probably used to seeing control testing procedures like the ones I showed earlier in the presentation, which is like, step by step, how am I going to test this control? But here you can kind of see side by side, right? Here's the control test procedure. Here are the frameworks that this control helps support, and then right on the side of that, there's the SQL that unlocks the automation or acceleration of this testing procedure. So it makes it really clear, it makes it audit consumable. People can kind of follow the breadcrumbs and figure out how you're coming to a conclusion about the effectiveness of a particular control. And this is really the great part of this, right? Like we mentioned before, that one of the weaknesses of the legacy approach is that these point-in-time audits, you're never more secure than the day before an audit, right? People try to get things cleaned up because the auditors, right? But this shows you the audit trail over time. You can go back and see the history that this monitor has been running every day, checking for nonconformities, looking for any kind of gaps in the controls operating effectiveness, and building that audit trail that you can show your auditor, like, hey, this is not just clean because you're here. Like, this is something that we take seriously and is effective all year round. So really nice to be able to build that picture of an audit trail.
And ideally, this is what you're reflecting to the different kind of stakeholders, the people that own different areas, right? So it's not just kind of you talking to yourself as the compliance team. It's like, look, we're tracking this continuously. And we're also reflecting to the different departments, how they're doing. And this also goes up to our CISO and the CIO and the CFO and whoever kind of needs to see it to give you air cover to get these things addressed. Like this shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody anymore, because you can say, hey, we've been reflecting this to you in the dashboards that you have access to, within Power BI or Tableau or whatever for the last 2 months. So why haven't you guys fixed it? Right?
Yeah, definitely. So look, there's a lot of different controls out there that maybe can't be automated. Maybe they're policy or process related things, but really there's a lot of green field here when you think about all of the different kinds of technical controls that would benefit from some audit automation. So share with us, if you wouldn't mind, Omer, where have you guys had success in Snowflake, with continuous monitoring? What kind of controls have you guys been applying a continuous monitoring approach around? There's a few examples on the slide here, but curious to see where you've seen value.
Yeah, so these are good examples. It's from a case study that we did with an insurance company, CSA, they're a AAA company, and they kind of put together some control validation in order to track both for themselves and for others how they're doing along the metrics that they care about. And these are some examples that they shared in the case study that we did. Very relevant for ours. One of the controls that were very important for us to automate was around user deprovisioning, right? Which is tough to get right, but can really get you in trouble if you're not doing it. And so we started tracking it. We also started tracking kind of the life cycle. So the expectation is when somebody changes roles or is no longer with a company, well, HR needs to open a ticket to IT, and IT needs to take that ticket and then remove that individual's access from those different systems, right? And if there is a case where somebody had access when they shouldn't have had access, well, whose fault was it, right? And we wanted to enable that accountability by showing each of the different departments, was this on you or was this on them, that kind of thing. And the heads of the departments took it very seriously. Once they saw the situation and they saw the role that their organization played in that situation, it was very straightforward for them to go and put in either the automation on their side or make the hires or the system changes they needed to avoid the situation. And in that area, for example, we got to 100%. We've stayed at 100%, even as the company has grown significantly. So really been seeing how when you operationalize this with live data, you end up in a much better security posture, not to mention more successful in the audits.
Yeah, that's great insight. And I think, for us at AuditBoard, we've seen a lot of value in our quarterly user access review process. That's a tedious one that's great to add some automation around. Obviously third-party risk, but our compliance team is just salivating at all of the opportunities that are in front of them now to really automate and continuously monitor lots and lots of different kinds of controls. So lots of opportunities out there for compliance folks if you're taking on this particular type of approach. So let's talk about some keys to success here, Omer. What should folks be thinking about? Let's assume they're bought into this idea. They want to take the next step. What kind of things should folks be thinking about to make some progress here?
Yeah, so I think it's first thing, yes, we're going to take a data-driven approach, and we're not going at it by ourselves. We have data experts inside the company, and then there's also an ecosystem that's geared to enable this. I think the exciting thing is this used to be pretty hard, and now it's gotten much easier. So kind of lean into that and reach out to the people that use the data platform at your company, whether it's Snowflake or whether it's a different one, and talk to them about things that are challenging for you or that you have on the roadmap for this year, and start brainstorming. And maybe the data is already present in the data platform, and if it's not, they can probably bring it in pretty easily. And then when it comes to actually kind of mapping the controls to the automation, well, that's where AuditBoard has you covered off the shelf. I think it's an amazing approach and can just plug into that existing Snowflake environment. And then once you do get the insights, right, go back to those stakeholders. Make sure that they're finding it useful, the way that you're rendering the insights, the way that you're giving them access to those dashboards. Again, we want to really empower everybody to own their responsibility and be successful. So there's some new flows, but hopefully that's helpful in how to think about it, and reach out to us too. I'll speak on behalf of Snowflake. We're really excited about this. You're seeing a ton of investment from Snowflake in the cybersecurity space in general. and then specifically in compliance automation, reach out, ask for an overview, ask for kind of a demo and all that stuff. And we have a lot of great content and material that we can share and present. We want to be your partners in this journey.
I think the one thing that I'll add here just quickly around keys for success is to be thoughtful about the workflow that you wrap around some of the continuous monitoring and automation. I think in the legacy model, there's a lot of focus around, well, how was the evidence collected, right? Did you sit over the shoulder of the engineer and take screenshots? And what's the chain of custody of that evidence look like? And how do you know it came from the source system that you're auditing? And I think in a more automated or continuous workflow, you still have to be prepared to visualize and explain to an auditor where the data came from, and enforce proper version control and change management around those workflows. So say, for example, regulations or your framework requirement changes and you've got to change the query, right? Is that query the sort of the final approved version that we all agree is the proper testing procedure for this particular control? So those kind of responsibilities as a compliance professional don't just go away because you've automated things. But I think having a platform where you can wrap workflow around this work makes that a lot easier to maintain that integrity and kind of show how the workflow works to the stakeholders that care about such things. The last thing that we'll cover also is, as long as you're making the effort to move to a continuous monitoring approach and automate evidence collection, you might as well take on continuous reporting and issue management too, right? This is one of the biggest ways that you can unlock value for your organization. When you move from a point-in-time audit, where maybe at the end of the audit you're sharing the results with your team and your leadership team, you're trying to drive the right behaviors and right changes, that no longer has to be a once a year or once a quarter activity. I think there's also a lot of value and opportunity in integrating dashboards into this work so that you can show off on a real-time basis how you're doing against the different compliance frameworks that you're beholden to. And I'm not big on public shaming, but it's, you can't really change what you don't measure, right? And so putting this data in front of people will really drive the right behaviors around your organization as well. But I think this wraps it up for us. So thanks again for joining us. Hopefully this was helpful to you. And, excited to see, what we all do together as compliance professionals to kind of bring about this really, revolutionary change to our profession.